In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a motion track and also apply a motion track to particles like you see here. The first thing you're going to do when you open up Adobe After Effects is go to File, Import, File, or you can just double-click this gray area in your project bin and it will bring up the Import menu. I'm going to select my video clip, click Import, and after it is imported, I will drag it to my timeline and it will create a composition the size of my video. It's going to preview that. So here's my video clip. And I need to trim off that beginning. I'm going to find the spot where I want this to begin. I think I probably want it to start right about here. So if you are used to Adobe Premiere, this is a little bit different. What I'm going to do to trim this is I'm going to grab this little blue bracket here. This is my work area start, and I'm going to pull it into my playhead where I want the video to start. I'm going to scroll forward and find where I want it to end. Maybe I want it to go to about here. This is going to be a real quick tutorial, so maybe I'll do that. So I'm going to bring this in, and that is my work area bar. So my hand starts here, it moves up and moves closer. Now what I need to do is trim off this excess. A couple ways to do it, but the easiest way for something like this that's a single shot would be I just go to Composition, and I'm going to tell it to Trim Comp to Work Area. Now this composition, this is only the length of what I set my in point and my out point to. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do my motion tracking. I want to track the motion of my hand for this shot. So to do that, you will go to Animation, Track Motion, and it puts this little track point. Now you want to find the spot where you want to begin tracking the motion. So I want to do it from the beginning of my clip, so I make sure my playhead is dragged all the way to the beginning. And then I have this little tracker. I'm going to increase the size of it a little bit. There's an outer box and an inner box. Now if you grab that middle, that is going to, if you grab that box itself, it's going to move around. After I have made the box a little bit bigger, I'm going to move over to my hand. And I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. Now this would have been easier if I had put a little speck or something like that with a magic marker on my hand. But I'm going to track this area on my hand here. And again, you can just grab it by moving the edge. Now you don't want to grab that center area because that is the center of the track thing, but just grab the outer area of the box to move it around. And you'll notice that it blows up an area so that you can see it a little clearer. But I think I'll track the center of my hand there. Now I'm trying to get a little bit more so you can get the top and bottom of my hand here. If you make it too large, then it's going to take a lot longer to track. After I have my area selected, then I'm going to move over here to my tracking menu, and I'm going to choose this button that says Analyze Forward. And I'm going to go ahead and click that, and then you will notice that it will go frame by frame tracking that area. And it finished. Now it looked like it did a pretty good job tracking that, and it puts all of these little track points. And I will be using that later to apply to my effects. Now, right now it looks like it did a pretty good tracking job. Sometimes it might make a mistake, and one of these track units might be out a little bit further. What you can do is you can just move them where you like, but I'm going to undo that. So if you find that you have some that are just kind of way out there, you can move them in. But this looks like a pretty good track. The next thing I want to do is I want to go back over to my composition. So right now I'm in Layer, I'm going to go to Composition. And I need to apply that tracker to something called a null object. So I'm going to come over here to Layer, New, and I'm going to choose Null Object. And then you'll notice it shows up in the timeline above. And it is not outputted with regular video. You cannot see it. It is invisible, but it is useful to apply a tracker to, and that's the null object. So then I'm going to come back over to my tracker over here, and it says motion source. So null object is here. I'm still in this area, and I'm going to say, well, I want the motion source to be this video here. So I'm going to go to that drop-down menu, and I choose the piece of video. And what do I want it to do? I want it to transform and use the position, and then I need to think, well, what do I want to be tracking? Well, I want to click Edit Target, and I want to apply motion to null 1. I click OK, and then I click Apply. That brings up my motion tracker apply options, and what dimensions do I want it in? The X and Y. So that's going to be moving in the X and Y position. I click OK, and I select that null. Now you'll notice that the null object is actually moving with that motion tracker. So I can use that motion information and apply it to my effects. After I have a null object that is tracking my motion, I'm going to come over to the Layer menu, and I'm going to choose Layer, New, Solid. And then I'll call this Particles. And it is a black solid. So the color is going to be black, though the color doesn't really matter for what we're going to be doing. Then I click OK. Now you'll notice that I have this black video that is on top of my video here because it's showing whatever's on the top. I have my particles, my null object, and then my piece of video. Now to apply my particles, I'm going to come over to my effects and presets, and I'm going to look for simulation. And then I'm going to scroll through until I find Particle Systems 2, and I'm going to drag that to my particle layer, that black layer. Now if I scroll through time, you'll notice that I have these explosive sparks that are showing up in the middle of the frame. But what I really want to happen is I want them to track the motion on that null object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the timeline. I'm going to expand that particle layer, and I'm going to expand effects and expand Particle Systems 2. I'm going to drag this open a little bit so you can see a little clearer, though that it shrinks the size of the window. And then I'm going to expand my null object, and then you see I have my position here, and then I've got all of those track points. What I want to happen is I want to make my producer, that center of that sparks, I want it to follow the null object. So I look for my producer, expand that, and then I go to the position, and you'll notice there's this little coiled whip. I select that coiled whip, and I point to the position on my null object. And now you'll notice that it is following the motion of my hand. And that's a pretty good start. I'm going to collapse the null object for now, and then experiment with the types of particles. Now, the first thing you'll notice there, it has the birth rate, how quickly these particles are forming. And you can adjust that as you see fit. And then how long will they last? Do you want them to last for just a moment, fraction of a second? Or do you want them to last a little bit longer? That's really going to be dependent upon your subject. The radius under your producer is the width of that producer. I'm going to leave it at 3 for right now, but the X and Y radius. I'm going to collapse the producer, and then I'm going to look at the physics. What type of animation do I want this particle to have? Default is explosive, but you can scroll through them and find the one that you like. For this, I'm going to be using vortex. Now when I bring that up, you'll notice that it is very wide, and I will adjust that with my velocity. So I bring that up, and you can see that though it still is wide, then I can adjust things like the gravity. Do I want to give it a lot of gravity, so gravity's pulling down on that, or do I want it to have less gravity? If I give it less gravity, then you'll notice that vortex is lighter. But it's still a little bit too wide. I can also adjust the resistance to it, but I think what I want to adjust maybe is that velocity a little and the inherent velocity. As I adjust that, then you're going to see how it changes a little bit. It's a pretty good start. The particles come up and rise up. And if I want to, I can adjust that resistance a little bit, and then the direction of it, and the extra. Right now, the particle is just a line. You can adjust it and change it to whatever particles you want. Bubbles or stars, or a faded sphere. You want it to have somewhat of a soft look. I think for right now, I'm going to keep it as a line. But again, all of these can be adjusted for your particular project. And maybe I'll adjust that birth rate a little bit. You can see what happens if you crank the numbers. And also the longevity. How long do I want that to last? You'll notice that it flows with my hand. And that is the particle. The next thing I want to do to this is apply a little bit of a glow. So I'm going to shrink this window a little bit and go back over to my effects and presets, and I'm going to type in glow. And I'm going to grab glow and I'm going to add it to my particle layer. And up here in my effect controls, it asks, well, what do I want it to be glowing? Do I want it to glow on the color channel or the alpha channel? For right now, I'm going to keep it on the color channel. And I can adjust that glow threshold. Radius, how wide is that going? The intensity of it. Now, do I want it to composite behind or on top of? Or do I want to add it as none for composite? And I'm going to choose behind for this. And how do I want it to glow? Do I want it to do a blending mode of add or multiply, perhaps screen? And again, that is going to really be dependent on your project. But I think for this one, I'm going to do add. Glow colors. Do I want the glow colors the original colors? Or do I want to do A and B colors? Now, if I go A and B colors, then it's getting it from here, color A and color B. Well, color A, I can change it to the color that I want. Maybe I want it similar to my sparks color, be a light color. And B, I don't want it to be black. Maybe I want it to be kind of a reddish orange. You can adjust that for your particular project. Pretty good start. Looking like it's a little bit overpowering. And then I might adjust that glow intensity or threshold. Or even the radius. Doesn't look that great at the moment, but we'll be making some continued adjustments to it. After that, I'm going to adjust the blending mode to this layer. So I'm going to go to Layer, Blending Mode, and I'm going to choose Add. And now that blends a little bit more the way I want it to. And then you may, after you've changed your overall blending mode for your layer, you can make whatever other adjustments you want. Adjust that midpoint a little bit, perhaps. And I think that I will leave that for right now. Then I can play through that. Next thing I want to do for this particular project is I want to add a little bit of a lens flare following that. So I'm going to add another layer. I'm going to choose Layer, New, Solid. And I'll call this Flare. And again, I have a black layer on top, but then I'm going to come to my effects and presets, and I'm going to type in Lens, and then I'm going to choose this Lens Flare. And I'm going to add that to my top layer. Now you'll notice that it is still over a black layer and it's not following my spark layer. So what I'm going to do is very similar to what I did for my particles. I'm going to expand my lens flare layer and the effects, and I go to lens flare, and it's this flare center. So I'm going to hide my particles layer a little bit, collapse that, and I will open up my null object again. And I'm going to get the whip from my lens flare and point it to my position. Now you'll notice that it is following that track for my hand, but I can't see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the blending mode to this black layer, this flare layer. And then I'm going to go to Layer, Blending Mode, and I'm going to change it to Screen. And now it is following with my hand. Though the lens flare is kind of static in its brightness. And I also think it's a little too bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my brightness here, and I'm going to dial it down just a little bit. But I also want it to flicker. So in order to get it to flicker, I'm going to use something called an expression. So I'm going to expand my lens flare layer, and where it says flare brightness here, I'm going to hold the Alt key, or if you're on a Mac, the Option key, and I'm going to click this little stopwatch. And that brings up this place where I can add an expression. So I'm going to type the word wiggle, and then a parentheses. I'm going to type in 10, comma, 12, and close the parentheses. And then I can just click out of that. What that's going to do is it's going to be adjusting the brightness of that, but it's somewhat random. It's going to be changing that brightness over time. And now you'll notice that that brightness flickers. The next thing I'm going to do, and you don't have to do this, I'm just going to adjust the background or the color of this piece of video. So I'm going to go over to my color correction. I'm going to apply a film look to this. I'm going to scroll down until I find my Lumetri color. I'm going to drag that to my video layer. And I'm going to go to Creative, and I'm going to choose a film look that I like for this particular clip. I'm going to use this Fuji Eterna 250D. I'm going to choose that. And I think that works for the look I'm going for. Now, one thing I want to mention, and you'll notice that I've got these sparks flying, and yet they don't really match the look of the video. There's not any motion blur. I want to add just a little bit of motion blur to these sparks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on motion blur for my particles layer. So I go to my particles layer, and I turn on motion blur. So you'll see this right here, simulate shutter duration. I click that, and now it's going to blur those sparks just a little bit, and it'll look a little bit more as though it were filmed at the same time. Last couple of things that I'm going to do for this is I'm going to add a light. Now, you could skip this if it doesn't work for your particular clip. But I'm going to take all of these layers, I'm going to select the top one and the bottom one by holding Shift, and now you'll notice all of them are selected. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to choose Pre-Compose. And I'll just leave it at this default name, and I click OK. And now it looks like a solid piece of video without all of those other layers. Now, the reason I'm going to do that is because I want to add a light to this layer here, and I want it to also affect all the other layers, and it needs to be a 3D layer. So I'm going to click and turn on the box right here for the 3D layer. Doesn't look any different right now, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a layer new light. And what type of light I'm going to choose is a point light. It's going to be like a ball of light. And for right now, I think I'm just going to use the color of white and see what happens. Now you'll notice that I have this light that I can move around here, but it is also affecting the brightness of the background. And maybe I don't want it to change and make the background look dark, but I'm going to slide this over. I'm moving it in the X position. If I grab this one here, I can move it in the Y position. And I'm not going to move it in the Z because I want it to stay the distance that it is right now. But I put it there, and I just want it to seem like there's a little bit of light there, but I don't like how it looks dark along the edges here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another light. I'm going to go to Layer, New, Light. This time, instead of a point, I'm going to choose Ambient. And I'm going to leave this ambient color white, and I'll leave the intensity at 100. And now, you'll notice that it got really bright because it is adding the ambient light plus the point light. So I'm going to come over to my point light, and I will go to my light options and dial down that intensity. And I'm also going to adjust the color of it. I just want it to seem like there's a little bit of light on my face coming from this. Now, if I wanted to, I could do a little bit more where I cut myself out here using rotoscoping. For this one, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to change the color of this maybe to match a little bit closer to the color of the sparks and the glow. And now I've got a little bit of a color hue, but you'll notice that it is affecting the background a lot. I don't want it to affect the background that much. I'm going to dial it down just a little bit. Now, if I wanted to, I could also adjust it so that it is moving a little bit, but for this, my hand doesn't move that much. I don't think it's that important, but I've moved it to here because I think that's going to illuminate my face just a little bit right there. No, there are other ways to do it. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change that intensity again, but I'm going to click the Alt button and click the stopwatch, and now I can type in that wiggle again. Type wiggle parentheses 10, 12, because I want it to match the other one. Now what's going to happen is that light on my face is now looking like it's flickering. Now if this is too intense, I think it is a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to back it off a little bit. But you'll notice that it flickers. And part of the problem, I think, for this particular clip is I have such a light background. But if you had a different background, it would look different and would perhaps blend a little bit better. But I think adding that little bit of a light flickering helps quite a bit. And you can experiment with that position of your point light. I'm going to move it down a little bit. Maybe I'll see the effect a little bit more. Again, trying to just make it flicker a little bit. And again, if some of this seems a little bit too bright, just go to your pre-comp, the one that is all together, double-click it, and then that will bring you to this. Now you'll notice for this one, I'm no longer in the composition that has the lights, but I can adjust these things. I can adjust the flare or the particles how I see fit. So again, all of these things I could adjust afterward. Maybe I could bring the glow up or down. Maybe I'll bring my glow radius down just a little bit, and I think I like that a little bit better. But again, I'm just showing that these things can be adjusted even after the fact. But now I can click back over to my other composition that has my lights, and maybe I like that a little bit better. And that is the basics to acquire a motion track from a piece of video and then apply it to effects such as particles or a lens flare or any other effect that uses X and Y data. The last thing you're going to want to do after you save it is do an export. So I'm going to go to File, Export, and Add to Render Queue. And I'm going to leave it at the best settings and click Render. That might take a few minutes. When it is finished, you can import it to your video editing software and do whatever final effects you want to do to it, as well as add your sound effects.